Hey everyone, how's it going? Josh Shepard here, and on this edition of the Threat Hunters Corner, we're going to be looking at VS Code remote tunnels being used for persistent remote access. Now, the reason we're looking into this is over the last several months, we've seen multiple different vendors from Sentinel-1 to Cybele to Palo Alto's Unit 42, all reporting that Chinese nation-state threat actors are making use of VS Code remote tunnels for persistent remote access. Now, when we think about what a VS Code remote tunnel is, right, it is a feature of VS Code that allows for remote access, right, as the name kind of suggests. The design intent behind this was to allow developers to access or remote in to some type of centralized development environment, and therefore all of your source code and all the developers could do work on some type of remote asset. Now, because it is a remote access or a remote access capability, and it's developed by Microsoft. VS Code is very popular, so it's got some pretty decent ubiquity across a bunch of different organizations and sectors. It really makes a nice tool for a threat actor to use, especially if VS Code's already installed on the machine, because then they're not going to have to worry about any type of ingress tool transfer. Now, from a threat hunt, detection, prevention perspective, on this one, I'd start broad, right? So with your threat hunt, start just to figure out, hey, from a baselining perspective, how popular is VS Code in my environment, right? Is anybody using VS Code? If people are using VS Code, now inverted pyramid, so we looked everything VS Code. Now we filter that down a little bit and say, hey, is anyone using VS Code to stand up remote tunnels? If the answer to that is yes, then we go down one step further, and then you're going to be figuring out, hey, where are these remote tunnels connecting to? Are these known and approved assets? If not, definitely dive in, because then you're dealing probably with either some type of shadow IT or acceptable use policy, or in the event of the focus of this threat hunt, some type of nation state threat activity. Now, once your threat hunt is all wrapped up and finished, when we move on to developing either preventative measures or detective measures, I'd kind of again look at that inverted pyramid, right? So, if at that top layer, when you're looking for any evidence of VS Code, if you found out, hey, well, we're just not using VS Code, start talking cross-functionally, chat with your developer, your developing lead, chat with your IT team, and figure out, is VS Code something that is desired in the future? If not, be broad, right? If you can do preventions, just block any type of installation of VS Code. If you can't or don't want to do preventative actions, you could write really broad detection analytics just to say, hey, anytime we see either a VS Code file or process getting spun up, fire us an alert. From the inverted threat hunt, if you are using VS Code, but then on your remote tunnel, if it turns out you're not using any remote tunnels, now you could do the same approach, but just a little bit more filtered down. So in your prevent or detect perspective, you could be looking for any type of command line arguments indicative of standing up a remote tunnel. Again, be broad on that. And then finally, again, at the bottom of the pyramid, so you're using VS Code, you're using VS Code remote tunnels. Now let's start figuring out which assets are approved to be connected to, right? If it's just remote servers, again, cross-functional communication and conversations are important. But let's look at creating some type of known good list. If your assets are more dynamic in nature, in that case, you could potentially look at IP blocks. You could focus more on a little fuzzier from a detection perspective. But again, this really goes to understanding your baseline, talking cross-functionally, and then try to make your analytic as broad as possible, right? When it's coming to this type of activity, if you could take a whole tool off the table. So if you either detecting or blocking all VS Code or all VS Code remote tunnels, or all VS Code remote tunnels outside of a very predefined IP range, it makes a threat actor's life significantly more difficult. So that's kind of this week's Threat Hunter Corner at a high level overview. We looked into this relatively new trend of these Chinese nation state threat actors using VS Code remote tunnels, and then talked through kind of an inverted pyramid approach to both the threat hunt as well as to the detect prevent actions following the threat hunt. As always, if you got any questions, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll see y'all in the next episode, and you stay safe out there. Bye.